first question that the Levite asked was, if I should stop to help this man, what will happen to me? And then the Good Samaritan came by, and he reversed the question. If I do not stop to help this man, what would happen to him? That's the question before you today. The question is not, if I stop to help this man, what would happen to me? The question is not, if I stop to help this man, what would happen to my job? The question is not, if I stop to help this man in need, what would happen to all of the hours that I usually spend in my office every day and every week as a pastor? The question is, if I do not stop to help this man, what would happen to him? That's the question. Let us rise up today with a greater readiness. In these powerful days, these days of challenge, we have an opportunity to make America a better nation. And I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you. You know, several years ago, I was in New York City, autographing the first book that I had written. And while sitting there autographing books, a black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing when I said yes. Next minute, I felt something beating on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. That blade had gone through and x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood. That's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had nearly sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received a letter from the president and the vice president, but I've forgotten what those telegrams had said. I had received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. But there was another letter. Came from a little girl, a young girl, who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at that letter and I never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." Said, while it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. I'm simply writing to say to you that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. And I want to say today that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960 when students all over the South started to sitting in the lunch counters. And I knew if they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream, taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which was dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, if I had sneezed. I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation in interstate travel, if I had sneezed. I wouldn't have been around here in 1962 when Negroes in Albany, Georgia decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent, if I had sneezed. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1963 when black people, Birmingham, Alabama, aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill, if I had sneezed. When I had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I'd had if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see a community rally around those brothers and sisters who were suffering. I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze.
Thank you very kindly, my friends. So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow,
To be here with you today. It is indeed an honor and is always a pleasure to be in the house of the Lord. You know, if I was standing at the beginning of time with the possibility of taking a kind of general and panoramic view of the whole in human history up to now, and the Almighty said to me, Martin Luther King, which age would you like to live in? I would take my mental flight by Egypt, and I would watch God's children in their magnificent church from the dark dungeons of Egypt on across the Red Sea through the wilderness towards the promised land. And in spite of his magnificence, I wouldn't stop there. I would take my mind to Mount Olympus, and I would watch Plato, Socrates, Euripides, and Aristophanes assemble around the Parthenon. And I would watch them there. They discussed the great and eternal issues of man, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even go on by the way of the man for whom I'm named had his habitat. And I would watch Martin Luther as he packed his 95 theses at the doors of the Church of Wittenberg, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come on up to 1863 and see a vacillating president by the name of Abraham Lincoln finally come to the conclusion that he had to sign the Emancipation Proclamation, but I wouldn't stop there. I would even come on up to the early 30s and see a man grappling with the problems of the bankruptcy of his nation, come with an eloquent cry that we have nothing to fear but fear itself, but I wouldn't stop there. Strangely enough, I would turn to the Almighty and say, if you allow me to live just a few years in the second half of the 20th century, I will be happy. Now that's a strange statement to make because the world is all messed up. The nation is sick, trouble is in the land, confusion all around. That's a strange statement. But I know somehow that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. And I can see God working in this period of the 20th century in a way that men in some strange way of responding, something is happening in our world. The masses of people are rising up, and wherever they are assembled today, whether they're in Johannesburg, South Africa, Nairobi, Kenya, Accra, Ghana, New York City, Atlanta, Georgia, Jackson, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, the cry is always the same: we want to be free. Now, I'm just happy that God has allowed me to live in this period, to see what is unfolding. And I'm happy that he's allowed me to be in Memphis.